Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Addiction Solutions with Roselle. So glad you could join us today for this show, and I hope you've enjoyed the shows up to this point. Housekeeping chores out of the way. I'd like for you to go to the YouTube channel, type in Addiction Solutions with Roselle, and hit subscribe. Also tell your family and friends to do the same. There's no charge to subscribe. You're just subscribing to the channel. And secondly, my books, 366 Days of Recovery. I have them available. Like I said, if you'll go to my Facebook page, type in information, I'll get back to you. This way you'll get an autographed copy of the book. And so, I'd love to autograph it. Now, I'm gonna do an upgrade or a brief introduction to what we're going to be covering in the shows. We've did experimentation. I've told you a little bit about myself, and then I told you we're going to use a phase chart, which identifies stop signs or areas that once you're addicted, you run through with disregard. So the first one was experimentation. Then we dealt with legal aspects. Today, we're going to deal with employment. After employment, we're going to talk about family, relationships, financial, health, mental health. Then we're going to go into the outcomes of the addictions once you run through them all: jails, institutions, death, and then the final is recovery. And so after we do the phase chart, I'm going to go into my workbook, which is 21 ways to prevent relapse. And it's a manual guide for individuals that are new in recovery. So this workbook has not been published yet, but it will be shortly, or we'll see. But we're going to be working out of that workbook. And so there's a lot of information in there. And then eventually I'm going to be working out of my books, which there's a lot of information. So as I said today and promised, we're going to connect addiction to employment. A little bit about Roselle. I had some of the best jobs in the world. I worked at Chrysler. I worked at the post office. Once Chrysler laid us off, I went to the post office. I was the manager of a party store. I sold life insurance. I was in the Air Force. I was trained to be an electrician. And I also ended up being a therapist in my recovery. My job ended up being a substance abuse therapist, and I did social work with the state doing foster care and protective services. But in my addiction, I wouldn't go to work if the job was next to my bed. I mean it. All I had to do was roll out of bed and I wouldn't go to work. I wanted to get high, and getting high was more important than anything I had ever, and once I was hooked, a job was just seemed like in the way. Yeah, I wanted the money, but when I looked at it, there wasn't really enough money to be going to work. So let's, hustle or do whatever we can to keep from having to go to a job. So when we talk about the addict in employment, I was a therapist once I finally got clean, and all of my clients were employed. And I mean, they had good jobs. They worked for the big three. City, state, federal, they had great jobs. So I worked real close with EAP reps. For those out there that don't know, an EAP rep is an employee assistance program. And so that's the representative that represents the employee. Chief stewards and committee men in the shops or whatever job you're on, I had to work with them in order to give updates on the employee. So now, this is what I'll give some information. I'll give you a little tip. If you have a drug problem, alcohol problem, go to the EAP rep now, or your committee man or chief steward on your job, and ask for help. When you do it like that, then, they don't really hold it against you as bad, but still now they're aware that there's a problem. But at least you did ask for some help. If you don't ask for help and then you start missing work and you start messing up on the job, then eventually they're going to make you go into treatment. That's going to be the option. So a lot of people I had in treatment, oh man, these guys had 20, 25, 30 years, on the job. And, they had been doing this most of their lives. And so they didn't see any problem in them missing 3 days out the week, or, them not coming to work for a whole week. They didn't see no problem with that. I mean, everybody was doing it. But then pretty soon these employers start cracking down because they were losing, productivity, when people didn't come to work. You had to get somebody to do their job, so on, so on and so forth. So, it began to be a problem. So they would send them into treatment. Well, they would give them the option, first go to the EAP rep. They would make the arrangements. There was someone called the gatekeeper, which was generally the insurance company that made the arrangements. And so they would get them into a treatment center. And so the one I worked at, unfortunately, Share House was a behavioral modification treatment center, which means you had to work. You had to get up early in the morning. You had to do chores. You ate breakfast with everybody. It was just like being in the military. And so a lot of guys that, had these great jobs and nice homes and cars, they couldn't get with this, because the treatment center also dealt with indigent and employed employees. So they looked at themselves sometimes as being better than the indigent. So they didn't feel that they had to do all this. Now, let me get something straight. They did have treatment centers where you played tennis, golf, rode horses, swim, everything. Hey, they had them. They still got them, So people that want that type of environment, I'm not saying you can't get clean or get better at that type of environment. That's your choice. However, the people that came to us they had been there. They had been to those treatment centers. And I'm not saying that the treatment center didn't do anything for them. I'm just saying that the job felt that they needed a more intense type of therapy. So then they came to see Roselle. Usually it was 45 days, sometimes 30 days. And so I would have to give, reports. We do, sessions. We'd have sessions with, the employee, and his representatives to see what progress they were making, what aftercare would be needed, and generally for most of these guys, aftercare would be a halfway house. And because that's where Roselle got started. I got started in a halfway house. My first job clean was a cook in a halfway house. I cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 30 to 35 people. I loved it. It kept me clean. So we're going to wind down on employment and addiction for this session. But what we're going to do is we got to pick this back up in our next session, because I really want to get a little more into this employment and let people know just because you got a job does not mean you're not addicted. So I want you to have a great day. Remember, go to Addiction Solutions with Roselle, type in subscribe, tell your friends, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks. Have a great day.